Hello, my name is Judy Mazur, and just introduce myself for a minute before I get started. I am a collector of things, mostly things relating to textile arts, fabrics, quilts, coverlets, thread, and buttons. I am not only a collector, but I'm an analyst and I'm a historian, so um, it's important to me to learn about the history of things I collect. And so that's what led to this project. I am a new official button collector, I'd say in the last 5 years. I have always collected those things, but in the last 5 years, I've learned about the button collection societies and groups and clubs and what activities that take place. So so that led me on this journey. Now, I don't have the money to collect the rare and vintage antique type buttons, so I started with plastic. And what that led me to was basically the history of plastics in the United States and production of items from new plastics. So I heard about these buttons made by Colts manufacturing, but I couldn't find any information, couldn't find anything about them. So I began to do some research. And so what I'm going to share with you today is my methods of research, a little bit about this company and how it is that they came to make buttons, and what the future for my research is. So let's start out by talking about the name Colts buttons. So often we see someone call it a Colt, but it is more appropriately should be called a Colts button. The reason is the company is called the Colts Manufacturing Company. Originally, it was Colts Firearm Manufacturing Company, and today Colts Manufacturing Company. So in my opinion, we should call them Colts buttons. So that's where we're going to start today. So to give you a brief history of the Colts Patent Firearms Manufacturing Company, the picture on the upper right is a picture of Samuel Colt, the founder of the company. Samuel Colt was born in 1814 to a modest farming family. He spent his youth working on farms in a textile mill. His father sent him to sea to learn a trade, where he conceived of the concept of the revolving cylinder. He applied for a U.S. patent for this design in 1836. He built his first factory in Paterson, New Jersey. Poor sales and business communication caused the factory to close in 1842. In 1848, he leased a factory on Pearl Street in Hartford, Connecticut. In 1851, he purchased a large tract of land on the banks of the Connecticut River in Hartford's South Meadows. He builds a large factory he called the Colt Armory, which was completed in 1855. The armory was topped with an onion-shaped blue dome on which stood a rampant Colt cast from bronze. He also built a manor house that he called Armsmere and employee tenement housing. He established a 10-hour day for employees, installed washing stations in the factory. He mandated a 1-hour lunch break, and he built the Charter Oak Hall, a club where employees could enjoy games, newspapers, and discussion rooms. Pretty progressive for mid-1800s, I think. In 1856, he married Elizabeth Hart Jarvis. So that's a picture of her in the lower right-hand corner. In 1862, Samuel died a multi-millionaire, leaving Elizabeth one of the richest women in the country. She helped manage Colts from behind the scenes. In 1864, the factory an armory burns to the ground, Elizabeth had insured the building beforehand and managed its reconstruction, including making it fireproof and recreating the Blue Onion Dome, completed in 1867. In 1901, company was sold to Armstrong and Shimmer, a New York financial house. A holding company was formed in New York State. The armory was still known as the Colts Patent Firearms Manufacturing Company. The holding company is known as the Colts Manufacturing Company. And in 1905, Elizabeth died. So this picture on the left is the original structure of the armory. And you can see in the background the Blue Onion Dome. The railroad tracks come right along the front where supplies were delivered. The river is behind. And if you pay attention to the facade of this building, this front building, this is the original building. And this is, just pay attention to this facade, we'll see it again. Over here is a close-up of the Onion Dome as it sat atop the armory. And this is a picture after the fire. So if you notice, the factory is gone from the fire, and all that remains is this facade that we were looking at in the previous picture. This picture on the bottom is a picture of that same space from the back. So you can see nothing left inside, only that facade was standing. This is the rebuilt factory. If you look at the picture on the lower left, once again, you see the original facade of the original armory still standing. This is the newer portion of the factory, and the picture of the broad campus itself. You see all of the factory components, the river behind. And I cannot date this. I tried to date this. It's I tried to enlarge it enough to see what kind of cars were in the parking lot, but I just couldn't get a good enough enlargement to tell. So I don't know when this picture's from. My guess is perhaps maybe the mid 1950s. I also want to say that all these photos are owned by the Connecticut State Historical Society, and they have many pictures of the Colts factory there that are free to look at. You can go to their website and you can look at the whole collection there online if you like. So the original Colt Armory, let's go back. The original Colt Armory was built in 1855 and was a central part of Samuel Colt's firearms making empire. It's based in the district of Hartford known as Coltsville. The armory was later joined by additional buildings, including housing for workers. The Colt Mansion Armsmere was also built on a nearby hill overlooking the factory. 3 years after Colt's death, the original armory was destroyed by fire in 1864. Not one to be discouraged by tragedy, Elizabeth Hart Colt chose to rebuild the armory. It was rebuilt using designs by the company's general manager, General William B. Franklin. The new building was designed to be fireproof and also larger than its predecessor. It was also more decorative with a design based in the styles of the Italian Renaissance. The new Colt Armory also carried over the most dramatic feature of the original structure, the Blue Onion Dome, with gold stars topped by a gold orb and a rampant colt, the original symbol of the Colt Manufacturing Company. Between 1865 and 1867, the East Armory rose from the foundation of the previous building, and once again, the Colt reared above Hartford. There is evidence that the rampant colt on the rebuilt dome was actually built in 1886 as an ornament for the Colt's private garden and was rehomed during Reconstruction. As for Sam Colt's use of the famous Onion Dome, a distinctive feature easily noted by drivers on I-91, there are different theories concerning its origins, ranging from its being a tribute to his early Russian business contact to simply being a dramatic marketing statement which no one would forget. Although some maintenance was done in the 1970s, after more than a century, the dome was falling into disrepair until the late 1980s and into 1990s, when Waterway Properties, the company who owned the property, began refurbishing the dome. As they removed the Colt from the building, the head fell off, and it was decided that it wouldn't be able to be repaired. It was then sold to an art dealer from Litchfield, who eventually sold the statue in 1995 to the Museum of Connecticut History, where it is now on display along with other Colt memorabilia. Today, a gilded fiberglass replica is used. The gilded wood original now being displayed at the museum. After the dome was redone, it was without the Colt until the early 2000s, when Robert Schuer was hired to create a replica statue. The current sculpture is made of fiberglass and was molded off the 1860 Colt to be as exact as possible without taking a cast. Now, once again, the dome is whole and shines on in Hartford. Coltsville is now undergoing plans for adaptive reuse, and there is support for transforming the complex into a national park. So, and let's see, and as far as the factory itself, we kind of discussed a little bit about that, but in 1918, wartime income was at an all-time high. They had 10,000 employees, and as gun sales collapsed after the end of the war, Colts diversified in an attempt to keep their employees. So between 1925 and 1925, the company diversified into these four divisions: the machine gun and small arms division, the electrical division by the purchase of John Pratt Company. They made meter protective devices, underground boxes, fuses, and cabinet accessories. They diversified into a washing and drying machine division. They made hotel and industrial washing machines, especially adapted to cleaning metal parts and china and glassware. And then the division that we are most interested in, the molded products and packaging division. They expanded into this division by the purchase of the Connor Latin Company. They moved the entire equipment and employees, including Benjamin Connor, to the Hartford Armory complex. In 1955, they sell the company to Penn, Texas, which that sale collapsed in 1958. What remained became the holding company Fairbanks Whitney. In 1957, the archives, what left of the archives, were donated to the Connecticut State Historical Society, where they are housed today. So if you have interest in that early documentation from the company, you are free to go there and look through the materials. However, due to a couple of incidents that happened, the materials do not contain very much button information. So I just recently found this posted on the internet. I've seen the rampant Colt pony, some say stallion, logo countless times, but never knew what it represented. Now I know, thanks to the Colt Fever website. The Colt Company emblem is a modification of the Colt family coat of arms dating back to medieval England. In ancient heraldry, a horse is a symbol of loyalty and service to a monarch. A broken spear or lance symbolizes a fallen knight. The famous rampant Colt pony is taken from the coat of arms and pictures a horse defending its fallen knight by breaking a lance in half, one half over its legs and the other in its mouth. This is an ancient symbol of loyalty. The Colt pony logo is stamped on almost all Colt firearms. Over the years, the pony has maintained its form, but has changed from skinny to heavier ponies and back again. Now, this is Benjamin Connor. This is the person who's the subject of our discussion. He's the person responsible for bringing buttons to the Colts company. He was born in 1900 in Ashtabula, Ohio, to an immigrant from Britain who reportedly built the first plastics factory in the United States. Now, I can't find any proof of that. Only this one line have I ever found to support that first plastics factory claim. About 1918, he studied engineering at Stevens Institute and New York University. About 1920, he goes to work for Auburn Button Works. In 1923 to 1925, he establishes Connor and Latin Plastics Company of Newark, New Jersey. 1925, Connor and Latin is bought by Colts. 1925 to 1936, he registers several patents under Colts, including the Hourglass molded shank. In 1937, he's made vice president in charge of the plastics division. In 1947, he's made executive vice president of Colts. In 1949, he becomes the president of Colts. And in 1955, the company is sold and Connor retires to Florida. He was a director of Colts, the Gray Manufacturing Company, and the Phoenix State Bank Trust Company. Active in its reorganization, he was the president of the Plastic Button Institute of America, which I also cannot find any information about. He was the vice president of the Government Research Institute, and in the early 1940s was chairman of the Hartford Committee for Economic Development, and he died in 1963. So Colts Plastic Division, they made molded plastics in the form of phenyl formaldehyde thermoset resin. They trademarked Colt Rock. In 1936, there was a flood, and the vats for mixing the plastic were on the bottom floor, and they were ruined. At the point in time, I believe they converted to use urea formaldehyde. In 1938, they were also damaged, major damage by a hurricane, and many of their documents were lost. The production is then moved to Dayville, Connecticut. So this hurricane, I believe, is the reason why we have very little paper documentation from the Colt company itself, including designs and sales and cards and all of those things. Today, the vats are on the top floor and gravity feed to the lower floors where the molding machines are located. And this design is still in use today. So in 1939, they introduced Colt Gems. This was a plastic made of acrylic. They trademarked and marketed it as Colt Stones. It's a cheap replacement for jewelry findings, and some have been found set in buttons. In 1955, when the company sold, the button molds and machines were sold and removed. Now, I don't have any verifiable information about who bought the molds, and so that's still an open question. They were mainly a container business for cosmetics and pharmaceuticals, and they're still in business today as Colt's Plastic Company. However, they don't make buttons anymore, and they rarely make items for the Colt's Firearms. They are mainly a container company. So in this picture, in the upper right-hand corner is a small card of Colt's gemstones. Now, this is not a factory card. This is a card that was produced by Brett Kramer, who is an avid Colt collector. So he made this card using the original fonts from Colt's Plastics. He owned all of these boxes of gemstones, and he placed one of each that he owned onto this little card, and he so generously gave me this card. In this bottom right hand corner is an original box of Colt's gemstones, the faceted ones, these blue faceted ones you see right here. And on the left, lower left, is a makeup kit. Remember, they're container company. So they produced and sold these purse makeup kits. Each section screws apart and contains some form of either makeup or hard perfume or things like that. This little paddle down here is a makeup panel to scoop the content out for use. And on the top is the screw top is identical to the screw top that's on the Rouge button that we know about. The makeup containers had 3 styles of tops. They had the cameo top that we know that's on the button, one that has kind of like a swirl star design, and the other one says tattoo across the top. They are interchangeable because they are identical in size, but the only one I've ever seen on a button is the cameo. So a little bit about how I research and document what I find. When you're researching information about anything, a non-operational company as we have in the Colts plastics division, you need to understand the source of the information and the context that it's given. So you need to question these sources. One place you find a lot of information is advertising. So when, you know, in advertising, I'm not sure we can always believe everything we hear in an advertisement. So you need to question, is it factual or is it a glorified claim? Verbal stories are a good place, but you need to question, are they verifiable? Are they firsthand accounts? Or are they just made up or anecdotal? Company records are an extremely good place to find information if you have access and if they exist. Newspaper articles are also a really good source of information. When Colts produced the Colt stones, they were very proud of them. And there's they published in a newspaper pictures of the Colt stones and an article about them. They were very proud of them. Industry publications are very, very good if you can find them. If you find industry publications, I would grab them. If I ever, they're so scarce. So if you find them, I would grab them. You never know what you're going to be able to learn about many other companies and many subjects in industry publications. Industry textbooks are very, very good. I have one. It's called the Plastics Handbook. It's published in 1945. It's extremely good information. It's very technical, but it will answer most questions about plastics in the 1940s and prior. Button sample cards are excellent if they are original and they include the company logo. And when you're researching, you should always include the source of your information in any presentation for publication, because if you want people to believe what you're saying, that source it needs to be verifiable. People need to be able to go look for themselves or believe that your source is a good place to get the information. I generally I generally document my research and what we know and what we don't know. So what we know is generally the things that I find and I can verify. What we don't know are all the questions that I have or that arise because of the things we know. So when it comes to Colts, what we know is the first buttons are made of a form of phenylformaldehyde, trademarked as Colt Rocks. These test positive for bakelite. These are mostly dark, opaque colors due to the filler that was used in the plastics formula. They then upgraded to phenol formaldehyde cast resins, which permitted a wide range of color and produced a transparent, translucent, opaque grade of plastic. So that's when you see apple juice, Bakelite, that's that. They did not sell to the retail market. They sold only to the garment and wholesale trade through distribution channels, who then carted and marketed to the retail market. They marketed through the use of salesman sample cards. So you will see here on the lower left, this is a verifiable Colt button sample card, an early card, these of a button called Gale. This is all in the cold stone or Bakelite material. In the upper right, you'll see a little bit of what you'll find in trade magazines. So they advertise a lot in trade magazines, these companies, manufacturers, they have to get their name out there so that they can sell their product. In the lower right-hand corner is an example of the end of a Colt Rock buttons container. And so then usually there's a button on the end. That's usually something that tells you what the size, the pattern, the color is contained in the box. And here you see it's manufactured by Colts Patent Firearm Manufacturing Company in Hartford, Connecticut. We know that they patented the molded shank with a hole, eliminating the drilling of the thread groove through the base of the button. They also patented some designs, so they had some design patents. But for a moment, let's look at this one, which is the patent for what we call the Hourglass Shank. So in the upper right-hand corner, this is a copy of the actual patent application that was presented to the U.S. Patent Office. In the lower right-hand corner, it said that these are examples that were submitted with the patent application. You'll see a couple of buttons here that we, this is how we have verified a couple of these. The top one is the one that we call Scranton, and it's the one that has a shank that looks like this red button. It has a hump and a thread groove that's drilled through the base of the button. So what changed in this patent, and is described in the patent itself, is how the base button is molded. So in the red button, you see the little hump, and you see the thread groove that's drilled through the base of the button. So what happened often is that in drilling, they had to drill all the way across the button and into the button itself to get underneath this little hump to produce the shank. It resulted in a lot of broken pieces, a lot of broken buttons, a lot of things that are just scrap. So a lot of loss of material. So when they invented the new shank type, they molded this little hourglass shape hump on the back. And in this case now, it sits up above the base of the button. They only need to drill through between these two little spaces. So no longer do they drill through the base and create this thread groove, only a hole through that little shank that sticks up above the button. And that resulted in much less breakage, much less loss. They also described that the drill bits would break in this process. There's a lot of heat generated by drilling through this plastic. So this was a huge improvement and increased their profit by not having the amount of damage and loss. So once again, you know, we talk about this hourglass shank, but we also find Colts with this little hump shank with the drilled thread groove. So if you find those, you know, you need to keep those and consider them as possible Colt buttons. This is a patent for a design patent. It was submitted by A.F. Donovan for the Colts manufacturing company. And so we call it the Donovan. I don't know that it really had a name within the Colt company. We don't have any of that material, so we don't know what their style numbers were. Designated by the company only if we find them on a salesman sample card, which we have not found this one on the card, but we do know it's a Colts because of this patent. Notice it was a patent in 1932. These test positive for Bakelite because remember they switched to urea formaldehyde in about 1936. This one, this is the patent was submitted by E.D. Martin for Colts manufacturing. And notice the date of this one, it was submitted in 1949. Now this button we have not found in Bakelite. This button is made of urea formaldehyde. It comes in solid and two-tone, mostly two-tone that I've found. Made by first putting one color into the mold and then topping it off with another color, in this case white first and then blue, and then the setting of the mold, and we have a two-tone button. We know that they had a UV vacuum metallizing process, so this was a factory applied decorative finish. These are examples of that metallizing process on known Colt buttons. They had a relationship with Plascon. Plascon was a producer of urea formaldehyde molding powders and pellets. So they, we know that they purchased the raw materials from Plascon for molding buttons and other articles. So they also used for urea formaldehyde for molding the plastic containers. So there are many ads out there for Plascon, and these ads include Colt articles, including buttons and buckles. So in the one on the left, you'll see some buttons, you'll see some buckles, you see some containers, you see a radio, all these things. Plascon advertising that were made from their raw material. On the right hand side is an ad in an industry magazine. It's an ad for Colts. And again, we see the buttons, we see the Colt stones, we see containers, inkwells, pistol grips. So when we look at these two, the one on the left, we know contains some Colt items, but we can't definitively say which one of these items are Colts. The ad on the right is a Colts ad. So we know everything in this ad was made by Colts. So there's 6 button styles here that we could confirm to be Colts buttons because of this ad. There's a couple of more Plascon ads. These you'll see the same sort of thing. We have buckles, we have containers. Here's the little purse makeup kits, makeup containers, buttons. And this is a great one on the right. It's all buttons, but the thing about this is there are some known Colts buttons in here, but there's also some buttons in here that are not necessarily Colts. So just because they're on this picture does not mean that they're Colts. It means they were made by material supplied by Plascon, and Plascon supplied material to many manufacturers. So just because it's on this picture doesn't identify it as a Colt. But we do see some in here that we can see are Colts. We can also see some hopefuls that we haven't identified positively yet. So what we don't know, this is the other side of my documentation when I'm researching. We don't know all the button designs that was made by Colts. There were hundreds. They made buttons from 1925 until 1955. And so, you know, it is just, if you do the math, that's just hundreds of designs that they would have produced during that time period. And we don't have the documentation for all of that. So we search for other ways to identify them. We don't know why there are different backs to the same button. I'll give you my theory, but I'm telling you, this is only my theory. I've never met anyone who worked in the plastics division factory. They are aging, they are passing away. I see many times obituaries stating that the person worked at the Colts factory or worked at the patent button company factory. And so I didn't get to them in time to ask them questions. And they're disappearing from us very quickly. So on this little button here in the lower left on the pink, this is a known Colt button, and here are two different backs. Now, in my opinion, the backs for a particular size of button, they're interchangeable. Okay, so you would just put whatever back mold would fit the button that they were molding that day, making that day, whether it was this back or this back. It didn't matter as long as it fit and made the button. I do believe that these flat back buttons were the first ones, and I think at some point they grooved it out and took some of that plastic out so that it used less plastic to make the same button, and thereby increasing their profits. Now, this is theory only, don't take it as fact, but this is my critical thinking applied to this issue. The gray buttons here, these buttons belong to Nancy Woltoff, and she supplied these pictures to me. This is a known Colt button. And once again, we have one with a humped back and one that has a groove there. And I think it's the same thing. This button, however, is identical to one that is made out of vegetable ivory. So vegetable ivory is the oldest material that buttons were made of in the United States. And they made this button. And so I'm pretty sure that Colt took one of those vegetable ivory buttons and copied it, made a mold, and this is what they produced. And at some point they grooved it out to save the plastic that was being used to make these buttons. The next little section here is this is a patent that's registered by B.F. Connor in the name of Colts, and I've never found this button. So the patent was applied for and received, so pretty sure they must have made this button, but I have never found one. The final section of this picture is this is another patent, again, patented in 1934, so most likely this was Bakelite, but I've never seen this button. So I keep my eyes out for these two. I hope to one day find one of each of them. Then we can add it to the known Colts. We also don't know what these numbers on the back of our buttons are. So little tiny imprinted numbers, and they're all different. Again, my theory is this is quality control. I think that in a mold that contains, say, 300 buttons, if the back has these little numbers on, and during the process one becomes damaged or isn't coming out right, they have the little numbers on there, so they can go to that mold and know what space that damaged button came from, and they can fix the mold or not mold in that space, so as to not continue to make a damaged button from an existing mold. Again, my theory only. Colt was very big on quality. Their buttons are quality buttons. You're not going to find cheap buttons coming from Colts. So that's my theory. Now, what about that P? So to go one step deeper, let's talk about that. So when it comes to this, this button, I take my documentation one step further into what we know and what we don't know. So in this button in particular, what we know is that Colts made the Trinity trouser, and it's, well, I mean, let's just say it's accepted that Colts made the Trinity trouser button with the imprinted P. We get that information from Betty Kay. She found a barrel of buttons in an antique shop, and they were put there on consignment from a man who apparently worked for the Colt factory, and she bought them and she documented them. And so it is accepted that these buttons were made by Colts, and these Trinity trousers with the P on the back were in the barrel. Between 1931 and 1937, this button was distributed by the Patent Button Company of Waterbury, Connecticut, along with their own manufactured button known as in Knoxville, Tennessee. Okay, their button was known as Pilot buttons. That's the name of the button. Okay, it's identical. So the Patent Button Company started making the Yale button, which they called Knoxite, in 1937. We know that after 1938, Waterbury ceased handling Colt's line of buttons. So any buttons that look like this that were made after 1938 were not made by Colts. They were made by the Patent Button Company. The Patent Button Company Pilot was made of urea formaldehyde, and the buttons on this sample card do not have the P imprinted. The Trinity trouser came in 2 sizes that we know of, the Pilot in 3 sizes. The 2 made by Colts are identical to the same sizes made by Patent. Patent Button Company did not have exclusive rights to sell these buttons by Colts, specifically the Trinity trouser, the Yale, and the Harvard. So what we don't know if the buttons on the Colt sample card have a P, because we don't have a sample card with that. We don't know when the buttons in the barrel were produced. And we don't know how to tell if the buttons was made by Colt or Patent Button Company, because they're identical. So the identifying specifics are here. I won't read all these sizes to you. They are documented and they are on my Facebook group. You can go and read that in detail if you like. The identifying features, the sole holes on these buttons are made by drilling. So if your button has straight sides around the sole holes of the dog bone shape, it is a molded button and it is not a Colt/Patent button. There's a flat space in the center of the sole holes. On the size 22, it looks like a square with the points cut off. On the size 27, it looks like a diamond with 2 corners cut off. Again, this is the result of the drilling of the holes. We find a lot of conflicting information. So that leaves us with a lot of questions and a lot of don't knows, right? So one case is the Colts Daisy. When you're looking at conflicting information and documenting, you need to document both sides, and then look for verification of what you know. So when I am trying to look for verification, if I find that I can disprove these statements like Colt invented it, or it's the largest or first to market, if I can disprove it, then, or by someone else had made it and marketed it, or it's a lookalike, then I know that particular button is not the Colts. So when you're looking at these conflicting information, it's good to keep notes. It's good to look at it objectively until you can find proof one way or the other. So one of the questions in this Colt Daisy, here's the button that we know is accepted by collectors as a Colts made button, because I believe this one was found in the barrel. I'm not sure off the top of my head. However, to the right of it here is the actual patent for a Colts Daisy button. They don't look alike. And I have never found an example of the 6-petal Daisy in an actual button. So while we have the patent, this is another one where I've never found an example of a button made off this patent. So today we still accept this multi-petal button as a Colts. So in study, I am a firm believer that collaboration is the best way. No one can research and document and theorize and all by themselves. You go down a certain path based on your own thinking, and when you're working with other people, they kind of pull you back and go, well, wait a minute, this is what I see. So collaboration is always going to have a better result than trying to do things yourself. I have a study buddy, and when we get into these deep dives, she's my go-to, and we look at them very critically, and we usually come up with some pertinent information. So how did we get here? Well, the first group formed at a National Button Society show, and the people interested in these buttons got together and had a little meeting and had a discussion. And then they formed an email group where they kept in contact after the show, and they continued to communicate for a long while back and forth between themselves and documenting what they found. The documentation was not it was haphazard, and it was just because one person decided to collect the information and store it for later use. So it wasn't official, it wasn't published, it was just collected. Much of the photographs were collected by Debbie Stribling, who put them out on a Google Flickr drive to store them, and as people submitted new photographs, she would store them there, and sometimes she would label them whose buttons they were, sometimes not. Sometimes the backs didn't match the front. It was just a difficult thing. Nothing against her. She was doing what she could to preserve the information that was being gathered, and we owe her a debt for doing that. So in doing so, she just started identifying the buttons with a number as they came into her. It's a nonsensical number. It is sequential. It's 1 through whatever. She just used the button to differentiate one from the next. It has no logical meaning. It has no meaning associated with anything other than that's the one they found next. So it isn't helpful in real when we looking for other information, but it is helpful to identify it today. However, we only have 80 right now, 80 to 83 confirmed Colt buttons. If we were to confirm 600, as the company suggests that they made, that numbering scheme would be very unwieldy and not helpful. So right now I'm looking for a way to reorganize these buttons in a more meaningful way, so collectors can more easily find them represented on the catalogs that we're producing. Are there any active study groups? Well, there are a couple informal groups. There is one through the Texas Button Society that's just formed and meet on Zoom once a month, I think. They're open to anyone who would like to join them and help or listen in on their discussions. They're new, so I haven't listened in a while. I don't know the specifics about what they're doing, but they are mostly trying to just learn from each other and educate each other on what they found. They're hoping to find some new things, and I hope they do. So why do study groups become inactive? Well, if you think about it, I mean, we have found probably 90% of what's going to be found about the buttons made by Plastics, Colts Plastics division. And so that leaves very little to find. It's very exciting when we find something new, but we just don't find it very often. And I think study groups get kind of, well, they don't, if they're not communicating because nothing new is being found, then interest seems to wane a bit, which is natural human nature. How do we connect? Well, there is no official group. There's no official communication threads or anything like that. Today, it is only a few of us who are doing our own research and making it available on our own spaces. So it would be nice if we could establish an official group that had some kind of storage space and distribution channel, but it doesn't exist today. What makes it official or confirmed? Well, at this point, nothing. It's truly just someone finding an example and everyone else accepting that example as truth. So we have the original 82. Deb Stribling added, or 80, and Deb Stribling added 2 additional ones that she found that she believes are new additions. I found one that I believed in the beginning was a new addition. I have since retracted. So we have to be careful with publishing that information, because once it gets out there, you can get it back. And I have, I've since decided that my theory may not be accurate, but I can get it back. People have gone off and started using that as fact. So we have to be careful about that. Where can I find information? Well, Deb Stribling has some worksheets that she's put together, and they are on her Facebook page, and they she makes them free for you to print off and use at your discretion. Again, this is while not copyrighted, it is her work, and so it's appreciated if you don't copy her files and spread them about, but you can definitely share the location with other people that they can go get their own versions. In my Facebook group, it's called My Quilt Friends. That is where at the moment I am storing all the information that I find about early plastics buttons and early plastics manufacturers. So I have created a 3-page catalog and worksheet of the Colts accepted confirmed Colts. This is a photograph of my worksheet. I am at the moment redoing it to add additional information. I'm adding a side view photograph and some other things. So that's not ready yet, but when it's ready, it will also be out there. And again, I'm providing this free of charge from my own research. You are welcome to print them off for your own personal use. I ask that you not print multiple copies and distribute among clubs or whatever unless you contact me first. I ask that you do not save the digital file. And the reason for that is not because I'm selfish, it's because as I'm working through this and I make changes, if you take the digital file and depend on that for your information and I make corrections, you're using old information and you're not going to get those updates. If you print a copy and then you come back from time to time and look and compare, you will get the updated version. You can print it again. But if the digital copies get out there around the internet, I have no way to control the updates. I'm not going to go find every copy and make updates. I update my digital copy for you to use. I will be leaving Facebook. I have secured a web space for a website. The website is going to be called buttonjars.com. It's in the process of being built out, and then all of my information will be moved off of Facebook into that web space. The reason being, I don't trust Facebook. I'm afraid that one day I'm going to go out there and be locked out of all of my research information. And so that's, as it is growing to be a comprehensive set of materials, that's a big fear that I will be locked out of my own photos and research materials. And so I am actively trying to move this all to web space that's controlled by me. So this is an example of what I produce for in a worksheet for my Colts research. And I'll just walk you through this briefly so you can see what I produced. Now there are 83 Colts buttons. I have worked on 10 of them in this manner. This is very time, you know, it takes a lot of time. This is just a lot of work to do. So I've only gotten to 10. However, here's an example of what I produce. For each button, and right now they are still being identified by that nonsensical number. That will change at some point, but right now that's the way they're organized. I document each size, one small picture of the front of the button so you can tell at a moment's notice which worksheet you're working with. I have measured, identify the size of the button by lines, which if you don't understand button sizing and by lines, that information is also on a Facebook group, and you can educate yourself about button sizing. I also measure each component in inches and in millimeters. I measure the size of the button, the height of the button, the size of the shank, and in some cases, the distance between the sew-through holes. I also document on these worksheets every color we have found the button. You will notice that some of the colors have an asterisk beside them. That indicates that I found that color on an actual card. So, there's a lot of colors that we found of these buttons that aren't actually on the salesman sample card. But this is how you can tell in my worksheet which ones I have found on a card. On the second page of each of the worksheets is the information about where we found or how we confirmed the button to be a Colts button. In this case, we have a photograph here of a actual Colt sample card. I include detailed pictures of the button, front, back, and side. And then I also document lookalikes. So in this case, there is one known lookalike, and I document how you can tell the difference. I'll go into detail about that in a couple of slides. And so this is how I use my worksheets. I have printed this sheet on a piece of paper and I attach it to a button card. For these buttons, I use cardstock, and then I slip them into plastic sleeves that I can put into a notebook. So I attach a button in each spot that I have identified. Now you'll notice down here, these two at the bottom, these two very large buttons, I did not know existed when I created the original version of this worksheet. So this particular worksheet needs some changes. I need to add this size and all of its details. So again, you'll see that, you know, having a digital copy of something can quickly become outdated. So when I get this updated, I will put the new version out on my Facebook group, and then it's your choice. You can reprint that page, or you can, however you want to. I will, however you want to do it, so that in your copy you have the updated sizes. So lookalikes, I'm so confused. Why do they exist? Well, historically, button companies, like all manufacturers, they wanted to keep up with the newest styles and what was hot in the fashion industry. They had employees who traveled to Europe, mainly to France and Italy, to see what was going on and what was going to be new in the market. They wanted to keep up with the best-selling styles. Then they created their version of that style. Yep, they copied. And so that's why we have things that look alike, made by different companies. Even though their designs were patented, I don't find many patent infringement lawsuits on design infringements. And that is because designs in the fashion industry, as you know, change very quickly. So by the time they might get through the expense of filing a patent design infringement, they're on to the next version. So it's just was really not monetarily beneficial to them. I am told that there's a patent lawsuit concerning the use of the Hourglass Shank, but I have not found it yet. I know that Blumenthal was making buttons using the exact shank. As a matter of fact, when I first saw those buttons, I could swear that they were made by Colts, but now I know that they were not. They were made by Blumenthal. And so it's my theory, once again, highlight theory, that it's possible this lawsuit was between Colts and Blumenthal, but until I find the actual lawsuit itself, I can't verify that. So let's look at a few known lookalikes. Now here's the one that we identify as the Colts #1. The top 3 pictures are of the actual Colts button. And the bottom are the lookalikes. And you will see people selling this button as a Colt all over the button selling places, eBay, Etsy, all these places. Don't fall for it. It's not a Colt, okay? And it's verified. We verified that it's not a Colt. So between these two first pictures, you'll see that the center hump on the Colts is larger. The swirls are more defined. You see here, you can hardly see the swirls, and the hump is smaller in size. On the back, here is the Colt Hourglass Shank. You see it's rounded, it's higher, and it's drilled through here. On the other one, the back is flat instead of this swale. The points of the hourglass are pointy. It's just a little different. And when you look at the side view, the Colts button stands very high. It's very heavy. It's very quality. On the bottom, you see the difference. You see it's very flat. It's short. It's almost flat across. The hump does not extend above. Now, this lookalike we have verified by a sample card from Auburn Button Works. So this bottom one was made by Auburn Button Works. It's style number 861 on their sample card. I've only ever seen one sample card produced by Auburn Button Works. So if anybody has one, I would love to see examples of those. And just as a note, remember, Benjamin Connor first worked for Auburn Button Works before he went off and started his own plastics company. So he brought many of those button designs from Auburn Button Works right over to Colts. The Yale is the most prominent one. It was produced exactly like the one in Auburn Button Works. It was produced in the same material, Bakelite. It's just a copy, an exact copy. So we know that happens, and this is how we know it got there. Okay, there's other ways that they copied too, but we know that some of these were just brought over by Benjamin Connor. Okay, so this one on the left is the accepted Colts button. Has these little radiating lines from the center. And I'm sorry I didn't get side views of this one, but this is a little flange edge. So it just drops off at a slant from the center button to the outer rim. The one on the right, it has the same radiating lines in the center. The sole holes are very, very similar. The backs are different, but that doesn't always concern me. However, the big difference here is that this one has a actual rim around it instead of this flange on the left. Now, we know this is not a Colt because this is actually on a US Button Company card or MSIG card. That card was shared with me by Barbara Weeks. She owns the card, and MSIG calls it the product that it's made from, they call permaloid. So now we know, right? For a long time, I thought that these might have been just another variation of the Colts button made by Colts, but no. Now we know this is not a Colts. This is MSIG. Here's another one. The one on the left is the actual Colts button. The one on the right is unknown. Now you can look at these side by side and go, yeah, that's not the same button, right? There's not, it's not similar. However, when you're digging through a bucket of buttons, a box of buttons, and you see the one on the right, very often you go, oh, that's the Colt, and you pull it out. Until you get it side by side, you don't notice, unless you're just very clued into this particular button at the time. So the difference is, you'll see on the Colts there, it looks like fabric. It looks like layers of fabric. It's very smooth and drapey. The one on the right is very pointy and sharp. And the one on the left has 3 layers. The one on the right has 2. I don't know who made that one on the right, but we'll know one day. So here's another thing I want to point out to you. What about buckles and slides? So at this time, there's only one known sample card of buckles made by Colts. It's shown in the book about Colts memorabilia that's written by John Olo. I didn't grab a photograph because that would be copyright infringement, but you can go usually find this book at the library. It's a very good book. I suggest anyone who's interested in Colts buttons get it. There's a lot of information in there. That particular card shows 6 buckles and slides. It's the only known sample card with a slide. So while there's a lot of them that look like Colt buttons, and looks like it should be a Colts, we can't verify it until we find it on an actual card. So one thing to note is that just because a buckle or a slide is on a card with a known Colts button, it does not mean that the buckle was also made by Colts. Remember, the retail cards were put together by the merchandiser, not the manufacturer. Here's a case in point. This is the accepted Colts button with a very similar looking slide, but the slide was made by Synthetics Plastics Corporation. It's called the Marty buckle by the manufacturer. And so while these may look like they go together, they were made by 2 different manufacturers, even though they're put on the same card by the merchandiser. So keep that in mind. There are many, many, many cards with matching buckles and buttons, but we don't know until we find those buckles on an actual sample card somewhere. So questions. How do I clean my Colts buttons? Well, I just want to caution you about one thing. The Plastics Conservancy studies suggest that you use no chemicals on plastics. You can wash with water, soap and water, and a soft toothbrush, and dry them off, and they'll be fine. They're plastic, okay? But chemicals on chemicals is not always a good thing. So plastic is a chemical, and if you use a chemical like simichrome to polish or clean and polish a plastic button, you don't know over time what that chemical is going to do to that plastic. So Plastics Conservancy studies suggest you use no chemicals on plastic. Now, I do use a very tiny smudge of simichrome on the back to test for bakelite. But I have seen people take a button and completely polish it up with simichrome. And then, and yeah, the button looks nice for a while. It's shiny and clean, but it may not be good for that button over time. And so I don't do it. I would rather my buttons were in original condition, as close to original condition as possible. And I don't want to do anything for future damage. How do I know it's a Colt? Well, we've kind of talked about that. The only way we know is if they are found in documentation that we can believe. The thing that's lacking is a centralized location to document all these things. I'm trying to provide that, but it's going to be a little while yet before I can do that, and in a safe place. So at the moment, it's like I said, my information and information shared with me is on my Facebook group. It's a private group. You have to ask to join, but if you answer the questions, that's all you need to do. And eventually I hope to get it out onto a secured server. What about that round offset and knockout dot? Does that mean it's Colts? No, remember, all these manufacturers using the same raw material. They're using the same molding compounds. They're using the same molding materials like to make the molds and to accomplish the molding. So no, that's just a design element of the back of many manufacturers' buttons. The knockout dot is the place where the liquefied plastic was injected into the mold, and when they knock that button out, that little dot remains there. So it doesn't mean it's Colt. It just means that it was manufactured by that process. Can I print out the 3-page catalog? Yes, you can. If you come join my Facebook group, you are welcome to print for personal use the documents I have produced. Please do not save the file. And I'm going to say that if I find, I mean, I trust the people that are coming into my group. I trust you first, okay? If I find that you're distributing digital versions of my files and photographs all around the internet, I have no problem immediately removing you from the group. So you will lose access very quickly if I find you doing that. What about the worksheets? Same applies. You're welcome to print for your own use. I'm not charging you for that, but please don't distribute unless you contact me first. I'm not going to say you can't make copies for your button group, but I would prefer if you contact me first. The reason being, if I have an update that needs to be done, and I haven't done it yet, it may motivate me to get that update done before you print it and share with your button friends. So what's next? Well, I'm working very hard to take incredibly good pictures to produce a new catalog with front, back, and side views, as well as writing a book, a small book that will be self-published, that will be available for you to purchase and have your own copy. That's all in the works. I have no dates, but I'm working on it, and it will not be expensive. I'm not in this to make lot of money or to make money. I only want to regain or recoup my investment in the materials and the machinery to produce the books. So I plan at this moment for these to be self-printed, self-published, and self-bound with a spiral bind so that you can open it and lay it flat when you're working with it. So that's where I'm headed. I'm also actively building out buttonjars.com, which will include the place where I'm going to store all my information. It will also include a button shop where I sell some of my buttons. But again, this is a long, lengthy process. And so it just takes me a long time to get all this done. But that's what I'm working on. You're free to contact me by email. You are free to join my quilt friends on Facebook. That is where it's all stored at the moment. Any announcements, future announcements, as far as when books are ready to ship, when I have new information, that is all going to be announced on my Facebook group. So at this point in time, that's the best place. So I thank you for listening, and I hope you've enjoyed this and found some useful information for yourself and your button collecting and your research. Thanks.